Hello friends, my name is Srivastava. I am Assistant Professor of Law at Amity Law School, Noida, Amity University, Uttar Pradesh. And today we are here to discuss a very important topic which is human rights and the Constitution of India. To tell you more about it, I will first and foremost we will first and foremost try to discuss what exactly is human rights. And before, I have actually made a presentation through which we are going to discuss it. And to discuss more on it, before we start discussing about it and we go into the nitty gritties of what exactly is human right, I would like to show you some videos. So we will start looking at a video now. Here it is.
Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. Well, that's tough.
Wow.
I don't even know how to give that a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something.
Yeah, any right that I think just as a normal, human, any...
The rights that humans have?
Oh, that's a very large debate.
Que tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, è una domanda complicatissima.
We just take them for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
Human rights are the rights you have simply because you're human. It's how you instinctively expect and deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your mind, and to be treated as an equal. There are many kinds of rights. Most apply to a certain group. But human rights are the only ones that apply to absolutely everyone, everywhere. That means kids, old people, poor people, basketball players, garbage men, rappers, teachers, Africans, Indians, Albanians, Christians, Muslims, Kabbalists, atheists, your mom, your dad, your next door neighbor, and you all have the exact same human rights. In other words, they're universal. But the question remains, what are they?
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right to live,
equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
Is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
According to the United Nations, there are a total of 30 human rights, which are usually lumped together and called simply human rights. They're all listed out in a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the world's most widely accepted document on the subject. But it was a long time in coming. At first, there were no human rights. If you were in with the right crowd, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you weren't. But then a guy named Cyrus the Great decided to change all that. After conquering Babylon, he did something completely revolutionary. He announced that all slaves were free to go. He also said people had the freedom to choose their religion, no matter what crowd they were a part of. They documented his words on a clay tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder. And just like that, human rights were born. The idea spread quickly to Greece, to India, and eventually to Rome. They noticed that people naturally followed certain laws, even if they weren't told to. They called this natural law, but it kept getting trampled on by those in power. Not until 1,000 years later in England did they finally get a king to agree that no one can overrule the rights of the people, not even a king. People's rights were finally recognized, and they were now safe from those in power. Kind of. It still took a bunch of British rebels declaring their independence before the king got the point that all men are created equal. Which isn't to say he liked the idea, but he couldn't stop that, and America was born. The French immediately followed with their own revolution for their own rights. Their list was even longer, and they insisted that these rights weren't just made up. They were natural. The Roman concept of natural law had become natural rights. Unfortunately, not everyone was so thrilled. In France, a general named Napoleon decided to overthrow the new French democracy and crown himself emperor of the world. He almost succeeded. But the countries of Europe joined forces and defeated him. Human rights was again a hot topic. They drew up international agreements, broadly granting many rights across Europe. But only across Europe. The rest of the world somehow still didn't qualify. Instead, they got invaded, conquered, and consumed by Europe's massive empires. But then a young lawyer from India decided enough was enough. His name was Mahatma Gandhi, and in the face of violence, he insisted that all people of Earth had rights, not just in Europe. Eventually, even Europeans started to agree. But it wasn't going to be that easy. 2 world wars erupted. Hitler exterminated half the Jewish population of Earth in horrifying Nazi death camps. And all told, 90 million people died. Never had human rights been so terrifyingly close to extinction. And never had the world been more desperate for change. So the countries of Earth banded together and formed the United Nations. Their basic purpose was to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. But what were human rights? Were they the proclamations of Cyrus, the natural laws of Rome, the declarations of France? Everyone seemed to have a slightly different idea of what human rights should be. But under the supervision of Eleanor Roosevelt, they finally agreed on a set of rights that applied to absolutely everyone. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The French concept of natural rights had finally become human rights. So, in summary, at first, only a few lucky people had any rights, until one of those guys decided, hey, other people should have some rights too, which was great, except not everyone agreed. And it only took a few thousand years of fighting and declarations and more fighting until everyone finally agreed that human rights should apply to everyone. And they all lived happily ever after. Except for one little problem. If people have the right to food and shelter, why are 16,000 children dying of starvation every day? 1 every 5 seconds. If people have freedom of speech, why are thousands in prison for speaking their minds? If people have the right to education, why are over 1 billion adults unable to read? If slavery has truly been abolished, why are 27 million people still enslaved today? More than twice as many as in 1800. The fact is, when it was signed, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights did not have the force of law. It was optional. And despite many more documents, conventions, treaties, and laws, it's still little more than words on a page. So the question is, who will make those words a reality?
I have a dream today.
When Dr. King marched for racial equality, he was marching for rights that had been guaranteed by the United Nations for almost 2 decades. But still, he marched. When Nelson Mandela stood up for social justice in the 1990s, his country had already agreed to abolish such discrimination for almost 40 years. But still, he fought. Those who fight today against torture, poverty, and discrimination are not giants or superheroes. They're people. Kids, mothers, fathers, teachers. Free-thinking individuals who refuse to be silent. Who realize that human rights are not a history lesson. They're not words on a page. They're not speeches or commercials or PR campaigns. They are the choices we make every day as human beings. They are the responsibility we all share to respect each other, to help each other, and to protect those in need. As Eleanor Roosevelt said, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home. So close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere.
So, we've seen a very, very interesting and wonderful video about what is human rights, why are they so important, and how exactly did human rights originate. We saw the historical side also, and we also saw some recent, I would say, not very recent, but then yes, post World War II developments as to how exactly the human rights started. To tell you more about it, now I will start sharing a presentation, and through that we will start discussing. So friends, here we are. We will come. We are starting with module 1 now. What exactly is the concept, nature, and significance of human rights? Okay. So what are human rights? As we saw it in the video also, human rights are the rights that we have simply because we exist as human beings. And it is very important to understand that they are inherent. We get it by virtue of being humans. They are not granted by any state. Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, and it is regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. What does it mean? It means that every human being will have human rights by virtue of being a human being, and it doesn't matter of which race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status you have. It really doesn't matter. As long as you're human, you will have those rights. Further, human rights, what are the kind of human rights that are there? So we saw that as far as Universal Declaration of Human Rights is concerned, it lists down 30 human rights, 30 basic human rights and freedoms that which every individual must enjoy. And here we on the in the point 3 we see that some of the prominent rights are not that others are not important, though even those ones are also important, because that is why they are there in Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So what are the human rights? Some of the prominent ones are right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, right to work and education, and many more. So important point to note is that everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. And friends, if you want to read more about it, you must go to the page of Office of the United Nations Human Rights Commissioner. There is a page known as What are Human Rights? And there is another page that you can go to, Global Issues, Human Rights, at the United Nations website. Now let's move further. Now, friends, what are the essential characteristics of human rights? This is very important. See, there are 6 words, okay, and these 6 words basically tell us the basic characteristics of human rights. The first one being universal. What is universal? Then we will come to these words one by one. The second word is inalienable. So human rights are universal, they are inalienable, they are indivisible, they are interdependent, they are equal, and they are non-discriminatory. So these 6 words basically depict the essential characteristics of human rights. What is universal? Universal basically means that human rights are applicable everywhere, irrespective of where does a human being live, in what condition the person is living, irrespective of everything. If the if as long as that living being happens to be a human, he or she will have those human rights. Then second is that it is inalienable. Inalienable means that those rights cannot really be taken away by anyone. So nobody can take it away from you, as you are a human being, and from your life till your death, or even afterwards. Every person will continue to have those rights. Then third is indivisible and interdependent. A second point, indivisible means that it is something which cannot be divided. So you enjoy it wholly. Next is interdependent. Interdependent means that these rights, as we saw in the video also, that there are close to 30 rights. These rights are basically interdependent. They are connected with each other. Then these are equal, as you all know that they need to be enjoyed in equally, and they must also be they are also non-discriminatory. That means there cannot be any discrimination on any criteria whatsoever when it comes to enjoying the human rights. Every human must enjoy these rights in a non-discriminatory manner. Let's start discussing more. Let's start discussing more about it. So let's come to universal and inalienable characteristic of human rights. Friends, the principle of universality of human rights is the cornerstone of international human rights law. What does it mean? It means that we are all equally entitled to our human rights. This principle, as first emphasized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is repeated in many international human rights conventions, declarations, and resolutions. So, friends, the point to be noted here is that this universality of human rights is such an important uh, characteristic that it is considered to be the cornerstone. It is considered to be the pillar on which the entire international human rights law stand. It is one of the focal points, and we all are equally entitled to our human rights. Next point is that human rights are inalienable. What does it mean? It means that they cannot be and should not be taken away except in specific situations and according to the due process. For example, the right to liberty may be restricted if a person is found guilty of a crime by a court of law. What does it mean? It simply means that human rights cannot be taken away from you. There are only certain situations, and that too in a lawful manner. Certain rights can be curtailed. But if there is no lawful manner, if there are no some specific situations, it cannot be in general. It cannot be taken away by anybody. And if somebody takes it, it is going to be illegal and may also get punished. Now, some situations, one of the exception scenario is given here. Right to liberty may be restricted if a person is found to be guilty of a crime by a court of law. What does it mean? It means that if anybody commits a crime, and if the punishment for that crime is, say, imprisonment, okay, then it is by virtue of that particular statute that that person can be arrested and his personal liberty can be restricted. So that is the meaning of that is some of the exceptional situations, but by and large, in general scenario, human rights are inalienable. Next, we come to the characteristics of indivisible and interdependent. All human rights are indivisible and interdependent. This means that one set of rights cannot be enjoyed fully without the other. For example, making progress in civil and political rights makes it easier to exercise economic, social, and cultural rights. Similarly, violating economic, social, and cultural rights can negatively affect many other rights. So, what is it? What is being talked here? Uh, the concept of human rights is basically indivisible. So, you enjoy it as a whole. You do not enjoy it in parts. That's number one. Number two, they are connected, they are interdependent on each other. So you can broadly classify human rights into various categories like civil rights, political rights, economic rights, social rights, cultural rights, so and so on and so forth. So It's very important to understand that these rights are connected, that you cannot enjoy civil and political rights if your social, economic, and cultural rights are suffering or lagging behind. So, one basically complements the other. So, when one right grows, the other also must grow. It is only then that an individual can expect to have a holistic development of his or her personality. If a person individual has some rights but others are denied to that person, then the holistic development will not happen. Next we come to equal and non-discriminatory characteristics of human rights. As I told you that human rights are equal, it means that every individual gets to enjoy the human rights in an equal and um, impartial manner. To tell you more, Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Freedom from discrimination, set out in Article 2, is what ensures equality. Non-discrimination. Now let's come to the second aspect. So UDHR is very clear. In Article 2 itself they say that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. All human beings. So they made it very clear and categorical that you cannot really say that okay, somebody is rich, somebody is poor, the poor person cannot enjoy the equal rights or something, and the poor and the rich ones can. So we cannot have this kind of perception. We must understand and realize that by virtue of the fact that the human beings are humans, just on the basis of that particular qualification, all human beings are free and equal in dignity and rights. Then number two, the second point that I'm trying to make here is that the non-discriminatory characteristic or nature of human rights. What does it mean? It means that the non-discrimination cuts across all international human rights law. This principle is present in all major human rights treaties. It also provides the central theme of two core instruments, that is, International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. So non-discrimination basically means that you cannot discriminate somebody on on the basis of some or the other criteria. You cannot really do that. It has to be applied equally everywhere, and everybody should be in a position to enjoy it fully without any kind of discrimination. And in fact, there are two major covenants which are specifically focusing on this particular theme. First is International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and second is Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, which is CEDAW. So we will get to know more about the instruments in times to come. Let's move further. Now, international human rights law. International human rights law is basically a body of human rights law, and it has several legal instruments in it. So let's just start understanding how this human rights law originated. As we saw in the video, in the ancient times also there has been some sporadic attempts in some or the other places where the rights were being recognized. But then in the other places we saw that the more powerful and the corrupt kings basically used to uh, make sure that these rights remain curbed, particularly if these rights of the slaves remain uh, curbed. So let's start understanding human rights. So a very important development that we saw it in the video also is Treaty of Magna Carta, which was basically signed in 1215 at the United Kingdom, and there Great Britain, and there what exactly the thrust point was that there are certain rights which every individual should enjoy, and even the king also cannot take away those rights from the ordinary human beings. So this is what the Treaty of Magna Carta is, and it is considered to be the most basic and the starting point of the entire jurisprudence or the philosophy of human rights law. Now, let's come to post World War II scenario. We all understand that after the Second World War, the United Nations was developed by many countries where they came together and they decided that enough is enough. Too much of destruction and too much of destruction has happened in these two world wars, and nobody really gets to get anything worthwhile out of it, and therefore it's very important that we must make sure that we should create scarce such circumstances that no world war ever happen again. So keeping that in view, United Nations was formed. There were several other objectives also, but then one of the main objectives of creating United Nations was to ensure that situations like World War One and Two developed, these kind of scenarios should never ever develop. So the international community need to come up together and do this. Create this international body known as United Nations. Now, one of the great achievements of the United Nations is the creation of a comprehensive body of human rights law, that is International Human Rights Law, or IHRL. In short, it is called IHRL. Now, IHRL is a universal and internationally protected code to which all nations can subscribe and all people aspire. So it is basically, it has states also as its members, and of course the people indirectly are the beneficiaries, ultimate beneficiaries of IHRL. And IHRL lays down the obligations of the governments to act in certain ways or to refrain from certain acts, to do something or not to do something in order to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms of individuals or groups. So this is what IHRL is. Now, what all is covered under IHRL, we will discuss that. To tell you more, we arrive at, so we're done with module 1 now, and we'll start with module 2. Historical development and scope of human rights. This is what is module 2. Historical developments of international human rights law. We have seen it in the video that the foundations of IHRL are the Charter of United Nations and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the General Assembly in 1945 and 1948 respectively. Since then, the United Nations has gradually expanded human rights law to encompass specific standards for women, children, persons with disabilities, minorities, and other vulnerable groups who now possess rights that protect them from discrimination that had been common in many societies. So now we come to a very important aspect. We will see what exactly was discussed in Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I'm going to pause here, and I am going to share. I'm basically going to share a video with you on Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Video will just start in few seconds, and then we all will start learning about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I'll start sharing the screen again. This one is a video on Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it is basically going to discuss uh, what exactly are the kinds of rights and how do you classify them. And as we all know that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed in 1948, and it basically divides the human rights into five broad categories, that is civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights. So this is what we are going to discuss here. So the video is just going to start in just a few minutes probably, or seconds, and then we will start seeing the video. So we start.
Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? After World War II, it was clear that the horrors of the war should never be allowed to occur again. Founded in 1945, the United Nations sought to prevent future atrocities by affirming, in its foundational charter, faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, and a commitment to promote better standards of life in larger freedom. In the years that followed, member states of the United Nations strived to develop the human rights provisions of the Charter and capture them in a single document. It took 3 years to agree on a common vision. On the 10th of December, 1948, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations.
Still, it is the first step in a great evolutionary process. It is the first occasion on which the organized community of nations has made a declaration of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and it has the authority of the body of opinion of the United Nations as a whole. And millions of people, men and women and children all over the world, will turn for hope and guidance and inspiration to this document.
While history alone can determine the historic significance of an event, it is safe to say that the declaration before us may be destined to occupy an honorable place in the procession of positive landmarks in human history.
The Declaration consists of a preamble and 30 articles, with Article 1 powerfully proclaiming that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. No discrimination, right to life, liberty and security. No slavery, no torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Equal protection of the law. No arbitrary arrest, detention or exile. Fair and public hearing. No arbitrary interference with privacy. Right to freedom of movement. Right to seek and enjoy asylum. Right to a nationality. Right to marry and to found a family. Right to property. Freedom of thought, conscience and religion. Freedom of opinion and expression. Freedom of peaceful assembly and association. Right to take part in government. Right to work. Right to rest and leisure. Right to food, clothing, housing, medical care and social services. Right to education. Right to participate in cultural life.
These human rights are not country-specific. They are not a reward for good behavior or particular to a certain era or social group. They are the rights of people of every color, from every race and ethnic group, whether or not they have disabilities, citizens or migrants, no matter their sex, their class, their caste, their creed, their age, or sexual orientation.
The Declaration has generated action for human rights protection in many ways. It has inspired hundreds of human rights instruments that together constitute international human rights law and a number of international bodies and mechanisms for human rights protection. The principles of the Declaration have supported the decolonization struggle and have been enshrined in the constitutions of the newly established countries which have joined the United Nations. The Declaration has inspired national and regional human rights protection systems, including legislation and institutions. And it continues to guide the work of human rights defenders and advocates worldwide. Today, the Declaration is available in more than 500 languages and dialects, and it has obtained the Guinness World Record for the most translated document in the world. The 10th of December, the day on which the Declaration was adopted, is celebrated each year as Human Rights Day. The Declaration emphasizes the relevance of human rights in our daily lives.
Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm, or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world.
All right. So this was another informative video where we saw what exactly is So this is the video that we saw where we discussed what exactly is Universal Declaration of Human Rights and under what circumstances it was developed, and what are the important values that on the basis of which this document was signed for the first time, and it basically also very rightly and very importantly discussed about all the 30 human rights and the freedoms that are very important, which every individual should have um, in order to lead a dignified life. And it is not something, it's very important to understand that these rights are really important to make your and my life meaningful. It is not something which is just written on the paper and it has no practical relevance. No. Uh, these rights, in my opinion, are so important that as and when you start, if you start, when you have everything with you, you do not, you know, you do not really understand its relevance. It is only when some of your rights are curtailed, then you understand, oh my God, this was so priceless to me, this was so important to me. How can this be taken away? So, and that's how I am just trying to tell you that some people say that human rights is a farce, or human rights is something which is very artificial. It really does not matter. In my opinion, the human rights are basically very important concepts, and something which is worth pursuing even if you do not have human rights, probably in a very practical way. It's very important that we always strive for it, even if you're struggling to realize your human rights. That is something which I want to tell you. Another thing is that now I would like to take you back to the presentation. So we will start sharing the screen again. So we come back to our presentation and we focus on the historical development of international human rights law. And I told you that the foundations of international human rights law are the Charter of United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the video of which we just saw just a few minutes back. It was adopted by the General Assembly in United Nations General Assembly in 1945 and 1948 respectively. And it is these two documents continue to be the cornerstone or the foundation stone of the entire jurisprudence of human rights law. And as the time started passing, several human rights treaties and conventions globally at different levels, at global level, at regional level, at national level, have been signed all across the world. But the basic premises have been borrowed from these two documents. Now, since then, the United Nations has gradually expanded the human rights law to encompass specific standards for women, children, persons with disabilities, minorities, and other vulnerable groups who now possess rights that protect them from discrimination that had long been common in many societies. Moving on, we first discuss United Nations Charter and the International Human Rights Law. So, United Nations Charter, I'm not going to discuss the entire charter with you, but we will just look at one article, which is Article 1, which basically discusses the purposes of the United Nations. So these are the four main purposes of United Nations, and the first one being to maintain international peace and security, and the second one being to develop friendly relations among nations based on the principle of equal respect and self-determination of principles. And the fourth one also is that to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in attaining the above of these common ends. I want you to focus on the third point, which is to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, etc. So, this is very, very important. So, one of the main objectives of establishing United Nations is to promote and encourage respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms. It has been categorically mentioned in United Nations Charter. And the entire body of international law basically was developed after the United Nations was established, and this happens to be the point 3, that is promoting and encouraging respect for human rights, happens to be one of the basic premises on which United Nations has been established. So that is the importance of human rights law. Moving on, we now move to Universal Declaration of Human Rights and International Human Rights Law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is UDHR, adopted by UN General Assembly in 1948, was the first legal document to set out the fundamental freedoms or the fundamental human rights to be universally protected. Okay, so this was the first document. We saw it in the video also that UN General Assembly had adopted it in 1948, and we also saw the words of Eleanor Roosevelt. It is a milestone document in the history of human rights as it sets the common standard of achievements for all peoples and all nations. The UDHR, which turned 70 in 2018, continues to be the foundation of all international human rights law. Okay, So it is basically more than 70 years now. It is to 2021, so it is 73 years plus, and it continues to be the foundation of all international human rights law. Its 30 articles provide the principles and building blocks of the current and future human rights generation treaty, human rights conventions, treaties, and other legal instruments. As I told you earlier also that it was mentioned in the video also that it has been translated into over 500 languages. That is the appeal of this particular document, that it has been read and it has been translated and read across the world in over 500 languages. And the UDHR is widely recognized as having inspired and paved the way for the adoption of more than 70 human rights treaties applied today on a permanent basis at global and regional levels, with all containing references to UDHR in their preamble. So this is the importance of UDHR, that after this particular instrument, there were more than 70 treaties and conventions and instruments of different character, all focusing on one or the other, some or the other aspect of human rights came into existence. And such has been the timelessness and the classic character of UDHR, that so many of the instruments have given the UDHR place in their own preamble. So this is what UDHR is. Now, before I take you to the next slide, I would like to show you a document by Amnesty International, and for that I will stop sharing the screen now, and I will take you to the page. So in this page, we are basically going to discuss what exactly is Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We will try to see what are those 30 rules. Okay, we'll focus on that. So I am going to start sharing the screen now. So this is the page that I was referring to. It is a page by Amnesty International, and it discusses Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So let's move forward. What is Universal Declaration of Human Rights and why was it created? We have discussed all this. It is basically a document that acts as a global roadmap for freedom and equality, protecting the rights of every individual everywhere. It was the first time countries agreed on freedoms and rights that deserve universal protection in order for every individual to live their lives freely, equally, and in dignity. It came into being on 10th December 1948, and it is on the basis of this particular date that every year globally the World Human Rights Day is celebrated. And I want to focus on these 30 rights and freedoms. So there is a very interesting page that they have designed. So you hover, so these are 31 to 30 is written, and when you hover over these particular numbers, they tell you which right UDHR deals with. So Article 1 deals with all human beings are born free and equal. This is Article 1. Then there is Article 2. It says that everyone is equal regardless of race, color, sex, language, religion, politics, or where they were born. Third is that everyone has a right to life and to live in freedom and safety. Fourth says, Article 4 says, everyone has the right to be free from slavery. Slavery is something which absolutely has no place in today's world. Article 5 is everyone has the right to be free from torture. Then Article 6 is everyone has the right to be recognized before the law. Article 6 also says that, yeah, it is just this one. Article 7 says that we are all equal before the law. Article 8 says that everyone has a right to seek justice if their rights are violated. So we are talking about remedy here. Article 9 talks about that everyone has a right to freedom from arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Nobody can be arrested arbitrarily, just like that, or nobody can be put under detention or go into put into exile, just like that. Article 10 says everyone has a right to fair trial. So nobody can be put in jail without proper trial. Then Article 11 says everyone has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Article 12 says everyone has a right to privacy and freedom from attacks on their reputation. 13 says that everyone has the right to freedom of movement and to be free to leave and return to their own country. 14 says that everyone has a right to seek asylum from persecution. 15 says everyone has the right to a nationality. Then 16 says everyone has the right to marry and to have a family. 17 says everyone has the right to own property. 18 says everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. 19 says everyone has the right of opinion and expression. Article 20 says everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. So you see, these all rights are very, very important. 21 says everyone has the right to take part in government and to have equal access to public service. 22 says everyone has a right to social security. Then 23 says everyone has the right to work, to equal pay, to protection against unemployment, and to right to form and join trade unions. 24 says everyone has the right to rest and leisure. 25 says everyone has a right to a decent standard of living, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and social service. 26 says everyone has the right to education. 27 says everyone has the right to participate in and enjoy culture, art, and science. 28 says everyone has a right to a social and international order where the rights in this declaration can be fully realized. 29 says that everyone has a duty to other people and we should protect their rights and freedoms. And 30 says that nobody can take away these rights and freedom from us. Now, why UDHR continues to have relevance even after 70 years of its adoption? Well, UDHR, as the title suggests, is universal, and meaning it applies to all people in all countries around the world. Although it is not legally binding, the protection of all rights and freedoms set out in the Declaration has been incorporated into many national constitutions and domestic legal frameworks. The Declaration has also provided the foundation from which a wealth of other legally binding human rights treaties have been developed and has become a clear benchmark for the universal human rights standard that must be promoted and in all countries. The UDHR continues to serve as a foundation for national and international laws and standards. For organizations like Amnesty, who are committed to protecting and fighting for human rights, it acts as a guiding inspiration for our mission and vision. So this is what UDHR is. this is what UDHR is. Now, we come back to the presentation again, and I'll start sharing the screen again. All right. So, just a second. Yeah. So this is what UDHR is. Now we move to the next slide. The structure, what we have seen in the video, we are basically going to see it now, in a more structured manner. So, just a second. So, Universal Declaration of Human Rights (UDHR). These 30 articles can broadly be divided into in these categories. Article 1 and 2 basically establishes the basic concepts of dignity, liberty, and equality. Article 3 to 5 establish other individual rights, such as the right to life and prohibition of slavery and torture. Article 6 to 11 refer to the fundamental rights, legality of human rights with specific remedies cited for their defense when violated. Article 12 to 17 sets forth the rights of the individuals towards the community, including freedom of movement and residence from within state, right of property, and right to a nationality. Article 18 to 21 sanction the so-called constitutional liberties and specific public and political freedoms such as freedom of thought, opinion, expression, religion, conscience, word, peaceful association of individual receiving and imparting information and ideas through any media. Then 22 to 27 sanctions an individual's economic, social, and cultural rights, including healthcare. It upholds an expansive right to a standard of living, provides for additional accommodations in case of physical and debilitation or disability, and makes special mention of care given to those in motherhood or childhood. And Article 28 to 30 establishes the general means of exercising these rights, the areas in which the rights of the individual cannot be applied, the duty of the individual to society, and the prohibition of the use of rights in contravention of the purposes of United Nations organizations. This is what UDHR is, and this is what the structure is. Initially, we see what are called the political, legal, and the political rights. And what we see at the later part is the economic, social, and cultural rights. Now we come to the concept of International Bill of Rights. UDHR, along with two covenants, which is ICCPR, that is International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, and International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, ICESCR, together make up the International Bill of Rights. Now, to tell you, so this is basically these three documents together are also known as International Bill of Rights: UDHR, ICCPR, ICESCR. So to tell you more about this, I will take you to the United Nations page. So I will stop sharing the screen now, the presentation, and I will take you to the United Nations page. Or what we will do is we will go to the United Nations page later. Let's move to the next slide. So these are together called, these three documents together are known as International Bill of Rights. Now we come to the third module, which is what are the leading human rights instruments in the world. So there are 9 main instruments which are considered to be the main bedrock as far as human rights jurisprudence is concerned. So we will focus on those now. First is ICERD, International Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. So these are all instruments. The acronym is in the first column, then the name of the full name of the instrument, then the date, and then the monitoring body. So what the human rights, this entire regime has done is they have set up an instrument, and to monitor how this instrument is basically how it is operating at the ground level, they have a monitoring body which basically does the reporting, monitoring and reporting function, that how exactly this particular instrument is faring um, at the global level. So, the first is ICERD, International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. This was signed on 21st December 1965, and the monitoring body's name is CERD. Then next is ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that I told you is a part of Bill of Rights. It contains all the civil and political rights. It was signed on 16th December 1966. The monitoring body's name is CCPR. Also, we have ICESCR, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, on the same date, that is 16 December 1966. The monitoring body is CESCR. Then we also have CEDAW. CEDAW is Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, 18 December 1979, and the monitoring body's name is CEDAW only. Then there is CAT, that is Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatments or Punishment. That was 10th December 1984 is when it was signed, and the monitoring body's name is CAT. Then next acronym is CRC, that is Convention on the Rights of the Child. The date was 20th November 1989, and the monitoring body's name was also CRC. Then the next acronym is ICMW, which is International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families. The signing date was 18 December 1990. Monitoring body's name is CMW. Then next we have CPED, International Convention on Protection of All Forms of Persons from Enforced Disappearance. The signing date was 20th December 2006, and monitoring body was CED. And the last is CRPD, Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, signed on 13 December 2006, and the monitoring body's name is CRPD. Now, it's not that there are only 9 instruments. There are, as I told you earlier also, that there are more than 70 documents which have been signed, on some or the other aspect of human rights. But these 9 are considered to be the main ones, the big ones. And you can read more about it again on the on the site of the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner at United Nations website. Then we come to, with this we are done with module 3, and now we will, I'll take you to some of the links on the OHCHR website. So I'll take you there. So this is the website of United Nations Human Rights Council, and I'll just hover through it for you so that you have an idea. This is United Nations Human Rights Council, UNHRC. What exactly it does, all that you can find out. These are the pages that are going to tell you that. So what is the history, how it was established, everything is mentioned here. All those things you can find out from here. Then what are the bodies, what is the HRC mandate, investigations, residency, membership, complaint procedure, media, everything is given over here. So this is what I wanted to show you, and I also wanted to show you some list of issues that are currently there. So if we look at some of the burning human rights issues, it could be adequate housing, it could be administration of justice, albinism, business and human rights. These are some of the contemporary areas on which the people in the field of human rights are working. Then, of course, children is one of the main areas. Then civic space, civil and political rights, climate change, coercive measures, conscientious objection, cultural rights, death penalty, democracy, detention, development, good governance and debt, disability and human rights, disappearances, discrimination, economic, social and cultural rights, education, environment, executions, food, forced evictions, freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, freedom of religion and belief, health, HIV, AIDS, human rights defenders, human rights education and training. So these are, some of the topics for rights of indigenous people, independence of judiciary, internal displacement, international order, land, leprosy, LGBTI people, local government and human rights, mental health and human rights, mercenaries, migration, minorities, nationality, older persons, poverty, privacy, private military and security companies, racism, reprisals, rule of law, safety of journalists. So you can see variety of topics over here. Terrorism is also here, torture, trade and investment. So these are all the burning areas on which various human rights related people work. And so broadly speaking, you can also look at areas like freedom of association, rights of child, war crimes and crimes against humanity, rights of persons with disabilities, prevention of discrimination, right to health, humanitarian law. So, I'm just trying to give you an idea that human rights is very, very expansive and very interesting field, and people who are interested in it can explore it more, and they can work more closely with human rights organizations, national or international, and give the meaningful contribution in the field of human rights. Then another page that I wanted to show you is the instruments that we just discussed, the 9 international bodies. This is basically the reference, and apart from that, there are all other optional protocols also. So that is also, there's an additional document apart from the main documents like ICCPR that we discussed. There's an optional protocol to ICCPR. Then there is also another second optional protocol, and then on all these things that we read, there is an optional protocol to some of them as well. So the countries actually need to sign them in order to become member of that. So this is what I wanted to show you from the site of the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. Now taking you back to the presentation and covering the last leg of the presentation, which is about Indian Constitution. That we've discussed at length what exactly is human rights and how it originated, what is its important, how it has developed. Now let's start focusing on India. So module 4 basically focuses on locating human rights in the Indian Constitution. And to tell you more about that, we will just focus on some of the slides. There are just 4-5 slides now, and we will be done. First is the political and civil rights under the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India under Part 3 classifies the most basic rights as fundamental rights. The fundamental rights were included in the Constitution because they were considered as essential for the development of personality of every individual and to preserve human dignity. Fundamental rights are classified into can be classified into various groups such as right to equality, which is Article 14 to 18, then right to particular freedoms like freedom of speech and expression, to assemble peacefully and without arms, to form associations or unions, and freedom to move freely throughout the territory of India, freedom to reside and settle in any part of the territory of India, and freedom to practice any profession or carry on any occupation, trade or business. That's given in Article 19 to 22. So these are various freedoms that are available in these articles, and these are very, very fundamental. Then we can also refer to right to life and personal liberty, which is given under Article 20, 21 and 22. Then right against exploitation is given under Article 23 and 24. Right to freedom of religion is given under Article 25 to 28. Cultural and educational right is given under Article 29-30, and right to constitutional remedies is given under Article 32. All these fundamental rights are guaranteed against the state action, and in other words, one can move to High Court or Supreme Court if any of these rights are violated. And you can read all these articles if you refer to the Constitution of India. Also, moving on, we also have cultural, economic, and social rights under the directive principles of the Constitution of India. And Part 4 of the Indian Constitution deals with the directive principles of state policy. It is the duty of the state to follow these principles of while these are fundamental in the governance of the country, and they must be used. Now, the points are right to adequate means of livelihood is given under Article 39A. Right against social economic exploitation is given under Article 39E. Right to both sexes to equal pay for equal work is 39D. Right to work is Article 41. Right to leisure and rest is Article 41. Right to public assistance in case of unemployment, old age, sickness is Article 41. So these are some of the rights which are of social welfare, social rights which are enshrined under the directive principles. And then the last point that I want to tell you is how the Indian judiciary has played a role. So there are many unenumerated rights, individual rights, or what we call as natural rights, which were not really written anywhere in the Constitution, but our High Court and the Indian Supreme Court in particular has played a remarkable role in adopting a liberal interpretation of Article 21 in order to make the life more meaningful and worth living. And they can be enumerated as under. So, all these rights that you're seeing here in the boxes are basically they have been declared as fundamental rights by virtue of various landmark judgments. So we have rights like no bonded labor, right to livelihood, right to decent environment, right to appropriate life insurance policy, right to good health, right to food, water, education, medical care, and shelter, prisoners' rights to necessities of life, right to speedy, fair, and open trial, right of women to be treated with decency and dignity, right of privacy, right to go abroad, right against solitary confinement, and a right against bar felters and handcuffing, right to legal aid, right against delayed execution, right against custodial violence, etc. The list is continuing in the next slide also. So all these rights that you see are basically created by the created with the help of the activist role that the Honorable Supreme Court of India has played, specifically by giving expansive interpretation to Article 21 of the Constitution. At the end, I would like to conclude by saying that human rights are indeed basic and inalienable rights of every human being. Every human being is entitled to those human rights by virtue of being a human. The Indian Constitution closely follows the human rights regime as well as jurisprudence, and it has enshrined many human rights in Part 3 of the Constitution. Several socio-economic rights have also made their place in Part 4 of the Constitution at the directive principles of state policy. Moreover, the Indian judiciary has played a very active role in interpreting and giving expansive meaning to right to life and reading many unenumerated rights under Article 21. My final comment would be that India has come a long way in these 70 plus years of its independence. However, everything is not perfect as envisaged. Many people continue to be deprived of even basic rights. Hence, there is a need to empower people to become educated and rights conscious, thereby becoming better negotiator of their rights in relation to their dealings with society to secure a more wholesome and dignified life. With this, I come to an end of the presentation, and if there are any questions for me, I'll be happy to take it up. They can leave it in the chat box, or they can give it to the organizers, and I will be happy to take them. So this is all that I wanted to explain in today's lecture. Um, we all have seen that how important the lecture was, because we were discussing very important topic of human rights, and then we try to locate it in the Indian Constitution. With this, we come to the end of the lecture, and I hope you have found it relevant, and you're going to practice, not only read but also make sure that you yourself in your daily life also are able to enjoy these rights, and especially when you're dealing with anybody in society, you should be in a position to negotiate and make sure that you are in a position to enjoy your rights properly and fully. So with this, I come to the close of this lecture, and thank you very much for the time, and I hope you enjoyed it and you learned a lot from it. Thank you very much. Bye bye. Take care.